Hey y'all, welcome back to our video series. I'm Peyton and I am joined by Corey and Yaila. And in today's video, we are going to talk about how to stop negative thoughts. So if you are someone who can get in those mind spirals where your brain takes off without you, going down a rabbit hole, today we are going to talk about how to stop that. So let's start with you, Yaila. How do you help people or even yourself get out of a negative thought spiral?
Yes, thank you, Peyton. I'm so glad we're doing this topic because I feel like that mind spiral that you're just describing is real. It's no joke. And so I obviously have my little go-tos, but I was so curious to see what you and Corey had as far as how do you stop your negative thoughts. So my first and foremost go-to is my energy. What I've come to notice and what I try to help my clients and students understand is many times we're having a negative thought or something's coming to the surface. We're feeling doubt, we're feeling worried, something that we're hoping to show up hasn't shown up yet. And then we start to kind of go into this, story, this mind spiral, as Payne greatly called it. So when that happens, first and foremost, I think most of us want it just to stop, just to go away. And so we kind of do everything that we can to get rid of it, not think of it, do something different, be distracted by, I call them extracurricular activities. So whether it is alcohol, drugs, other people, shopping, there's many extracurricular activities that can show up to be a distraction when in all reality, how I try to stop my negative thoughts is first and foremost not to stop them. In the past, when I tried to stop them and to distract them, they would linger a lot longer. And what I've come to find is, at least for me and people I've been working with, is when you actually just let yourself have the thought, it doesn't last that long. It's not as heavy as you're worrying it's going to be. It's not as bad as it actually think it's going to be. It tends to be a lot more mild if you let yourself just feel the feels. And I think there's just been I don't know where this training came from, but it feels like it's been going on in society for centuries. It was kind of funny because what spawned my idea for this was actually hearing about Prince Harry and, just his and Meghan's interaction with the royal family. And for whatever reason, like their information just keeps being thrown into my social media. And just going through as far as like, you can't show emotion, you can't give someone a hug or, like showing emotions is bad. And so it stems from the examples that we kind of had in society, and not to like single out the royal family, but it was just a funny coincidence that we came up with this topic and that was just bombarded into my feed. It's like, wow, why do we think emotions are so bad? Why are we so afraid to feel sad? Why are we so afraid to be mad? Why are we so afraid to be frustrated or whatever the emotion comes up? And so my first go-to is let yourself feel the emotion. So do you need to make it a big, huge public display? Probably not. I'm definitely more of handle my stuff and my own business, but let yourself feel the feels first and foremost. Second thing, how do you stop negative emotions is realize it's just your thoughts. It's not you as a character. It's not you as an actual person. It's not your whole worth and what you're able to do in the world. It's just a thought. And so when you stop attaching yourself to these thoughts or these negative emotions, you tend to stay in the observer perspective and just understand, okay, why are these thoughts here? So for example, I'm never going to be able to do XYZ. That's for somebody else, but not for me. Or things don't always work out. The world is just a crappy place. Whatever the negative thought is, it's to separate yourself from that being the truth, right? I call it truth with a capital T. So no matter where your life is, the truth would always be the truth. And it's a negative thought and it's not the truth, because if you didn't have that same thought, if everything in your life was going great, you would not have that thought. So it can't be true if it's not true in all situations. And so when you separate yourself from the thought of being your makeup as who you are, as your character, that's another really easy way to not hang on to it for so long. And then the last thing I would say, as far as how do you stop the negative thought beyond just letting yourself feel the feels, beyond separating your identity from the thought, the last one is to really let the energy flow through your space. So I'm kind of person, I get curious, right? So when I have a negative thought, I kind of ask myself, well, why is that thought there? I start to like peel the layers of the onion back, because in a way it's like mini shadow work. And we've had a video on shadow work if you want to explore more of that at another time. But I just start to get really curious of like, well, why am I thinking that I'm not good enough for this? Or why am I thinking that I can't ask for that? Or why am I thinking? And I start just to get really curious. When I realize it's a thought and I realize it's kind of keeping me stuck, I'm like, well, why is this there? Because there's usually an underlying belief. There's an underlying story that I get to explore. And I just keep asking questions until I feel comfortable and satisfied with what's been showing up. So negative thoughts to me are not actually that bad. What I've come to find is that when we are going through an up level or a growth period, or we're shifting into a new just way of operating in our world, whether it's in relationships or, how we're showing up, there's going to be a messiness that kind of happens before that. And so when there's challenging times, and challenging times comes with challenging negative thoughts, it is my go-to clear notification, like, oh, something is changing and I'm having these negative thoughts because there is a disconnect between what I truly want for myself and where I'm at currently. And so that negative thought is kind of showing me there is a gap, there's a bridge. And when I get curious, I actually can be excited, like, oh, okay, so this bad thing isn't bad. It's just an up level. It's a shift to a new way. And so it's kind of that, death and rebirth kind of phase. And maybe that's why, shadow work is such a great thing to explore with negative thoughts. But if that's helpful for you, try it out for yourself. But that's what I would start with as far as negative thoughts. How do you stop them? How about you, Corey?
That's great, Yaila. So negative thoughts. Well, I actually annoy people with as optimistic as I can get. I'm like annoyingly optimistic. So the negative thoughts don't come that often. However, OMG, the other day I was at a psychic fair, and I was driving home, and all of a sudden all these negative thoughts were coming in, and and I was like, wow, what's this? So first things first for me, and how I work with my clients, is that when those negative thoughts come in, I mean, I heard them, and I like what you said, Yaila, about, what we resist persists, right? So if we resist it, it's just going to get louder and louder. So I was observing my thoughts, and I was like, all right, okay, so is this my energy, my thoughts, or not my energy or my thoughts? And I came to realize that this was not my negative thinking. Yes, the energy was on me. My mind was thinking negatively. But when I traced it back to where I'd just been, there was somebody who was talking to me just before we left. And she, bless her heart, she was just really charged up. But the energy was negative. And so I realized that I had not cleared my space. And so I was like, wow, so I traced it back and realized that it wasn't mine. So what I will do is I will ground it out. I was like, this isn't mine. And then I just ground it. I either give it to my spirit guides or source, creator of all that is, and say, okay, you can just take this away now. Or I will throw it down into Mother Earth and just ground it out. And it's amazing that when I do that, for the most part, it's all gone. However, a few little negative thoughts came up, and I was like, all right, well, let's just keep clearing it. Just kept clearing it, grounding it out until it cleared. So that's one type of negative thinking that occurs with moi. The other one is oftentimes if I have negative thinking, I'm beating myself up, or my students or my clients are beating themselves up. And the first thing that I do is I always either ask my students or clients and myself, now, is that really true? Like I'm like the person, the homeless person. Not that there's anything wrong with homeless people, but you know that you see sometimes the people out on the streets and they're talking to themselves. That's me. Literally, I will say, now, is that true? No, it's not true. Okay, so then what? Where's that coming from? Like, what's the deal? And yes, I will trace it back to where it came from. So instead of saying no, like, nope, can't think that, nope, I ask myself a question, like, is that true? I go, no, it's not true. And then I'll trace it back. And then when I find out where it is from, I will remove the energy from my space. And that has been the best tool I have ever learned. So I don't often have negative thoughts anymore because they know they'll be grounded out. But I don't stop the thoughts anymore. I did have lots of period of time in my life where I was brought up, not to feel. My grandmother was, she had mental illness. And so we weren't allowed to feel, or we weren't allowed to express it if it was large. And then working in the film industry, your opinion, your feelings don't matter. Just work, work, work. And so I was really good at shutting off my emotions, negative thoughts, especially when I was working with somebody and having been very close proximity. I thought, okay, well, you can't afford these negative thoughts. So I would find one redeeming thought, one redeeming quality of that person. And that's what I would focus on. And the negative thoughts would go away. So, but when I found how to do energy work and was able to actually energetically remove that negativity, the negative thoughts out of my space, and teach others now how to do that, it was life-changing for me. So that's what I've got on how do you stop negative thoughts. Peyton.
That's so funny what you guys said, because of course I would come in at the other end of the scale. So Corey, I love that you said that you just don't have them all that often, negative thoughts, because my mind is a gremlin. And if left unattended, it will spin out for, I am not kidding y'all, for hours. And I'm very creative and imaginative. So I can come up with any worst case scenario for pretty much any situation. And so dealing with negative thoughts and this negative mind spiral was one of the first struggles that I really had to get a handle on when I started doing my intuitive work. And this is actually the very first thing that my guides ever told me and told my teachers. They're like, she has to get out of the mind. She has to. And this was such a foreign concept to me. I had no idea what they were talking about because, as some of y'all know, I used to be a lawyer for a very long time. And so I lived in the mind. I was trained to be in the mind all the time. The mind ruled my universe. And so to have the guides telling me and teachers telling me, you have to get out of the mind, that was total gibberish to me. I had no idea what that meant, what they were talking about. I thought they were nuts. But what they were talking about was that when we are in the mind, we can't stop the mind from the mind. So using the mind to stop negative thoughts doesn't really work. And so instead, my guides had to teach me another way to do this because, like I said, mine will just spiral indefinitely. And as Yaila was mentioning, we don't want to push them down. We don't want to suppress or distract ourselves. But at the same time, you can't be like me where you would spend a whole day in a negative downward spiral of imagination. So for me, what my guides started teaching me was that we have to get into the heart, because when we move our consciousness into the heart, the mind can't operate there. So moving your consciousness from the brain, where most of us live, where I certainly lived, into the heart will actually stop the negative dialogue. Because again, the brain, the ego mind can't operate in the heart. It's two different operating systems. So this is something that my guides were teaching me from day one, because I was trying to open up to talk to my guides. And what they would tell my teachers is, we're shouting at her all the time, but she can't hear us because her mind is talking over us. So this was like an important thing for me to deal with, was figuring out what to do with these negative thoughts, because my mind, and I've worked with so many other professional clients who have had the same issue. So if you are someone who has come from a very, logical background, very left-based career, this may be a little more of a struggle for you. So for me, the shortcut to getting out of the mind, especially when, the ponies get on a rampage and just kind of take off without you, get into the heart center. And we have talked in previous videos about how to do that. But what this does is it cuts the circuit. It stops the mental rambling. And so learning how to get in your heart center can get you out of what I call a toxic brain spiral. Now, sometimes our brain is helpful. We are solving problems. But for me, mine tends to be not so helpful. So getting into your heart can be the first step. Now, the second thing that my guides have always taught me about stopping negative thoughts without suppressing them. Now, we're never saying suppress anything. So that's always a big caveat. The next thing for me is to figure out what is the theme in this issue, not the story. The story is who said what, who did what to who, all of that. That's the story. So what my guides have taught me is we need to then identify the theme, or we like to say in intuitive work, the energetic charge. And that just means, what is the feeling that is going on in this issue? So if you're having a fight with somebody, what is the feeling state underneath that? Maybe you're feeling like Yaila gave the great example of relationships. Well, maybe it's not so much what someone else did, but it's that it caused you to feel abandoned. So for me, the guides always steer me to, so that we don't get into that territory of suppressing or denying. They always encourage me, what is the theme? What is the feeling under this situation? And then once we have identified that, and a lot of times the theme is very simple. I tend to notice it's one word, it's unworthiness, or it is, abandonment or isolation. And if you don't know what the theme is, because sometimes the ego mind will hide that from us a little bit, asking your heart to show you what the theme is. You will get usually an indicator, a word, an inspiration as to what is really the issue, the energetic pattern that is causing the negative mind spiral. And again, it's usually very simple. And once you have that, whether it is abandonment or unworthiness, then you can deal with the problem energetically. So what my guides always say is, once you have identified your theme and you're in your heart, you have the tools to do the next step, which is to process that energy. So do your processing around the issue of abandonment. And one way to do that, of course, is what we call integration. And that is a process of bringing that energy into your heart chakra. We tend to always do our work in our heart chakra these days, and process that energy, because what you want to do, the way my guides lay it out, is you want to remove the negative programming, whether that is negative beliefs, negative thoughts, the negative filter that is laying over that energy. And as you integrate that energy in your heart chakra, you dissolve the negative belief, which is causing the whole mind spiral. And you do it without denying it or suppressing it, or, as Yaila pointed out, distracting yourself from it. So those are kind of the 3 steps that I always go through to make sure that I am, first of all, stopping the mind spiral quickly. I'm not one of those lucky people like you two ladies who pass through a negative spiral in a couple minutes. I will live there if given the chance. So getting out of it, getting into your heart, and then doing the energetic processing of it. What caused that? Because if you don't deal with it, that energy remains active in you and will rear its ugly head on another day when you are not paying attention. So we always want to deal with whatever the underlying energetic pattern is. And we like to use the fancy word, the frequency harmonic. You want to identify that, process that, and then redirect the energy. So this is something I had to work on a lot. I was not naturally good at it. This was a real problem for me when I started out. So I can sympathize if you are someone who struggles with getting in negative spirals with your thoughts. So for me, those 3 steps can be super helpful, and they will make sure that you're not just distracting from it, suppressing it, all those things that we always want to be very cautious of when we're doing our energy work, because we never want to be sticking our head in the sand. We want to identify the energy and move it out of our energy field. So those are the 3 steps that my guides have given me. What else comes up from you guys on negative thoughts?
Peyton, you crack me up. I wish I moved through negative thoughts in minutes. No, I'm kind of like you. I've battled depression actually runs in my dad's side of the family, and I've kind of had my own stints of it, and where I was down for months at a time. I wish it was hours. I wish it was minutes. But some other things that come to mind when you're attaching the negative thoughts, and I kind of touched on it before, but it really is, your identity is not your thoughts. Your identity is not what you believe is only showing up in your current reality. And so when we stop making that like the ultimate truth. I loved how you said, Peyton, go back into your heart center, identify what's the emotion, what's the theme? Because when I was in those dark, heavy places, all of my thoughts were about, this is me, this is my story, this is where I'm stuck, there's no hope, basically. And so when I would pull myself back and just look at, okay, well, these are just thoughts, right? It's not me. It's not my identity. I loved how you said, go and bring it to your heart, bring it to your heart chakra. I'm an Aquarius, so being in my mind is really comfortable for me, and I can go on the ins and outs as far as where the thoughts are going. But when I just separate myself from, my thoughts are not my end all be all, it's not set in stone. Tomorrow can be totally different. When I started catching myself in the complaints and the gripes and the stuck stories, when I just started questioning, like, is that really true? Right. Corey and I were talked about that. Like, for me, I could kind of question, like, wait a minute, this thought, and I would basically like be devil's advocate to my own inner thoughts as far as like, wait a minute. Okay, so you're saying this, but is that really true? When was it different? Is there another example outside of you? Has somebody else had success in that area that you think is completely hopeless? I could play devil's advocate in a way, so if you're someone who you don't know how to get out of your mind, because when I was in those dark places, I'm an Aquarius. I live in my mind. So I would play devil's advocate. So if I could add anything to that, to separate yourself from the story and just question those thoughts as far as, is that really true? If it weren't true, if you could imagine it maybe a different perspective, if you could imagine that this is actually for your highest good, what would be good from this? Play devil's advocate to yourself. What are some deeper questions to ask when I'm stuck? Or think of it right now if you're not in a rough place. When I did health coaching, we called it the saboteur. I loved how you called them gremlins, Peyton. We called it the saboteur, and we would actually name the little saboteur personality that would show up with the gripes, the complaints, the negative thoughts. And I'm like, oh, that's just, whatever my gremlin's name was or saboteur's name was. That's just so-and-so. And I wouldn't identify it as my truth. So that's something I would add.
Yeah, I think that sometimes it can be helpful, just like you said, to be an observer of it. And that's another way that I do it is I'll notice that my mind is agitated, and then without judging it, because it's easy to slip into judgment of ourselves over it. Like, oh no, I'm doing it again and da, da, da. But instead, if I just put myself in the observer mode, like I'm watching my brain, it gives you a little bit of distance. And all of a sudden, you're not so identified with the thoughts and you can be a little more impartial. And so I find that, if I'm like, okay, the brain is a little amped up right now, like a kid with too much sugar, let's just watch it, and see, where this show is going. And so as I do that, then I can get into what you're talking about, Yaila. I agree, that questioning mode, because then you start to see that the mind isn't making a whole lot of sense. And so that's when it's easier to see through, the lies of the mind, because the ego, our mind is not a bad guy, but it likes to stay in the known zone. It doesn't like us getting into this energy stuff, getting into the heart, because it loses its job. So the ego kind of freaks out a little bit, but if we can observe it, then we can kind of see through some of its tricks. So I find that standing back and kind of just trying to observe it as if it's somebody else's mind can be helpful. So I love that point, Yaila.
And I loved how you talked about, bringing it to your heart. And, I'd forgotten all about that. I was like, oh my gosh, I remember that now. And I remember the whole process of coming, Peyton, from your head to your heart. And I'd forgotten all about that because, we've all, grown so much. But listen, I've had plenty of parties in my own head. I can run amok in there. I can put some housing in there and build a whole little town, where I'm just like, blah, 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 blah. But I have had a lot of practice. I have had a lot of years of practice of not beating myself up. And so oftentimes somebody will hear me go, really, Corey? Really? Like, what are you talking about? Oh, sorry, I'm just talking to myself a little bit. It's like, really, Corey? Really? Like, you're going to go there? Really? It's that devil's advocate. And I loved how asking yourself questions. Curiosity is our superpower. And, the years that I did spend in my head, I grew up with it. My mom was actually pretty critical, very judgmental. So, that's what I knew. It's what I knew. So I could totally be in my head, but I lack a lot of air in my personal astrology chart. So, but it can, run away with like the ponies, right? Like you said, like you could be off and running. And, but I've learned too that I think I've learned because of pure survival. Hours and hours and hours with, people that I had to find a way to not think negatively about. Did they give me reasons? Yeah. But oftentimes too, is that I live by this golden rule, and it's treat others as you wish to be treated. And I converted it to think of others as you wish them to think about you. And one day that came into my mind. I was like, oh, Like, would you really like it if somebody was thinking that about you because they were being judgmental and critical of you? Do you like that? No. So, these are the conversations that I have with myself. But it's good to have these conversations with yourself. That observer, we step back and we do the observation. And again, I do have a tendency to be the eternal optimist. I had to tone it down a bit years ago because I really pissed people off by being so optimistic. Now, balance. Everything is balance. So, but I love that going into the heart. Yeah. The feeling, okay, here's the feeling. Okay, here's the head. And then feeling into it, going, okay, why do I feel this way? That's making my head chatter. And that took me a long time to do. It really did. Feelings. I thought feelings were going to kill me. You want to feel. Now, you get a lot of practice, and that's the thing. We're always learning. Till the day we transition to the other side, we have plenty of time to practice and learn and change and grow. And for me, I have to make everything fun. So that always helps.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, for me, getting into the heart has been the only technique I have ever come across that can really stop any sort of mind spiral, no matter how bad it is, how long I let it go. That was always what cut the signal. So for me, if you haven't tried that and you're someone who struggles with getting those mind loops, practicing getting in your heart is the first thing that I would recommend to someone. So hopefully we have given y'all some techniques to try out the next time you get in one of these crazy train spirals with the brain, and have some things to try, because a lot of times we try to solve the problem by thinking more, and that's never the solution. So try these out. Let us know in the comments below if they're working for you or what you do when you have a lot of negative thoughts that you're trying to stop. We always love to hear y'all's experiences. So thank you so much for watching our videos. We can't tell you how much we appreciate you and your comments, your likes, your follows. We really appreciate your help in sharing our videos with anyone that might benefit from them. So we appreciate you guys spending time to watch all of these videos. So we will see you next week. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.